issues that are going on? What are farmers facing right now? And when I came across your website, I realized you're running a company that I didn't really know existed, which is that you guys give advice on what cover crops people can plant, and you even create like the mixtures of seeds for people. If you were explaining your business to somebody that does not understand agriculture, cover crops are no different than regular crops. How do you explain this to them?
Yeah, so especially in Montana, a lot of the cover crops are used as forage crops, kind of in place of another crop or in place of fallow. So Montana's drylands has a lot of crop fallow. So that means that they grow a crop one year and the following year don't grow a crop at all. And the idea of storing water for the following year. What they found over time is, and so through research, that really you're not storing as much water as you're hoping. And so now a lot of guys are kind of changing that mindset to growing a crop every year and using that off year to potentially graze, use it on their livestock, or to add just diversity to the rotation. So we do a lot of custom blends either for grazing or to try to fix some of the other problems that are in the field.
That's such a weird turn of phrase, like that they would store water in the ground. Like that doesn't even compute in my Missouri mindset where we get 40 inches of rain.
Right. So our average annual precipitation across the state is pretty variable, but it's anywhere from 12 to 15 inches a year. And so they're trying to store enough to grow that following year's crop. But what research has shown is that in the best case situation, you can only store about 25% of the moisture that falls in that fallow period. So if you're fallow for a year and you have 12 inches of annual precipitation, the best case situation, you would be storing 3 inches of additional moisture. The rest of that's either lost to evaporation or deep percolation or runoff. But they're, in the older mindset that was enough to grow, a better crop.
And so when you're putting this, you call it a forage crop. This is like, hey, we're going to put it in there. And then the year that we're not planting crops, we're going to let like cattle go in there and feed, or we're going to just have it to wildlife. What does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, it's both. So some guys are doing it crop, putting it strictly in place of that fallow. Some guys are diversifying their rotation in addition. So you see peas, lentils, vetches, some of the pulse crops are starting to really come into Montana. It goes back and forth between Montana and North Dakota as being the largest pulse grower in the United States. So it fits really well in a wheat rotation, but then these cover crops fit also. And so they'll plant a cover crop, and typically the guys, especially like in Eastern Montana, use them for grazing, and they can use them to graze mid-season, maybe to defer off some of the rangelands so they can rest that rangeland a little bit better. Or a lot of them have been using it for kind of a storage crop, so they don't have to feed as much hay. The idea of Montana, we do get a fair amount of snow. And so in that winter period when they would normally be feeding, if we can plant a forage crop that's going to stand up tall, the cattle still prefer to graze over eating hay. So you can put something out there that stands, that they can still go out there and eat, has great nutrition for them, and that defers having to roll it into a bale and roll it back out and feed them. You can do it with something that you just kind of stockpile for them.
I'm struck because like I'm a Midwestern kid and, worked at Monsanto. So I kind of think about crops in terms of them being in rows. You plant a seed and then you go a little bit further forward, you plant another seed, but there's space in between those. But pulses, they don't really, do you plant pulses in rows in the same way that you do like corn and soybeans?
You don't use a planter, you use a drill on all your pulses, your cover crop, your wheat, or anything like that. So they're going to be in rows, depending on the guy's plant, situation. They're going to be anywhere from 7.5 to 10-inch spacing on average. So they're still in rows, but they're just not as, defined. You're not going to have the exact row space in between that you do with a corn or a soybean.
And what does that mean, a drill? Is it because you're doing something different than just like carving a hole in the ground to drop it in?
No, so on corn uses a planter, and so what that has meters that are going to measure exactly where that plant or that seed is falling. So it's going to be a pretty exact planting method. So it's going to, you're on 30-inch or 24, whatever row spacing it is, and then you're going to set that exact population of what you want that population to be. So it has discs inside that a lot of times are vacuum. They'll suck that corn plant or corn seed up, and then it's going to drop it on a schedule or a certain rotation so that those plants are going to be a certain spacing within your row. With a drill, it's not as precise. We call it kind of a controlled spill. So rather than saying we're going to have 1 million seeds per acre of wheat, we know we're going to have probably 60 pounds an acre, a bushel, or 60, 70 pounds, whatever we decide that seeding rate is. And so we're calibrating on a pound weight. And so that's going to suck it up and it's going to blow it out, but it's not going to blow it out as precise. So you might have, wheat that's right next to each other, and then you might have a little gap or something like that. It's more of a controlled spill that you're planting with. So you don't get the precision you get with the planter.
And so, I mean, I used to work for a seed company, and so I'm very aware that, each year they come out and say, oh, this one has a new stand. It's going to get a little bit taller. We've actually got another, it's going to get a half a bushel more per acre, or 2 bushels, or whatever that is. Does that go on in the pulse market? Like, what is it that farmers are buying when they go out to buy pea seeds or whatever? I don't even know what all fits into the pulse world.
Yeah. So corn is pretty unique. Corn and soybeans is kind of that market you're talking about. You have a lot of tech involved in making those seeds or kind of breeding up those seeds. So there's going to be a turn over each year of what other problems are coming up. They're invested in, making those varieties better continuously. Pulses are going to be more similar to wheat. So pulses fall under the category of peas, lentils, chickpeas, anything that's kind of those cool season legumes are a lot of your pulses. And those are bred mainly by universities still. And so a lot of the seed is, some of it's older. So you're using some, seed that's not protected. And then you're also using seed that's, being bred by universities that are going through their programs. And then there are some new private seed companies that are coming out with some different genetics out there to kind of fit the market of what it's going into. So the breeding, does have some disease and packages like that, but it's also going into having a more consistent product for dog food or for people or whatever, so that they can keep that protein level at a certain level so it doesn't vary as they're putting it into the end product.
I remember being struck. One time I was in my late 20s probably, and with my brother, he was grazing some cattle, and we went over to look at the corn, and I was like, why does this corn look like it's sick? And he was like, well, it is, right? They can get fungus, they can get these diseases. And it had never dawned on me that a plant could get sick and that you could create resistance. You could give genetics that would be like, no, this plant already knows how to get around this sickness. But I think that's like something that people living in the city don't have any concept of like a blight. It's just something that is not a part of their life. So explaining it to them is really hard to wrap your mind around. What sort of blight is a danger to the types of crops that you advise your customers on?
So, the pulses can have quite a few different challenges. So there's some different fungal issues. So Ascochyta is one that can be a challenge. It can be seed-borne and get into the soil. And then there's also—
And what does it do? Ascochyta?
Ascochyta.
Ascochyta. What does it do to the plant?
It basically aborts it. It kills some of the tissue. You start to see leaf spots, and then it will, it's probably the major disease of peas in kind of our region. And being soil borne, what happens is if you get that into a field, or seed borne, I guess, you can potentially affect the crops in the following years. So if you don't have a long enough rotation between your peas, you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot, where you can basically breed this disease up, so it makes it hard for you to grow peas in the future.
So tell me a little bit about why a farmer needs advice on seeds, because I think the general conception would be like, I've got some land, I want to grow some food here that I'm going to sell at a good price. Why is there somebody that comes along and says, we can give you better advice than what you would just make on your own?
Because farmers do a lot of jobs. So I was actually just talking to a group the other day, and we were talking about how, as a farmer, I'm sure lots of people have heard this, they are meteorologists. They have to know when the weather's coming, when to plant something, what that soil temperature is going to be, to make sure that they're putting that plant in at the exact right time, what weather events are going to have effect on that crop. They're also mechanics, because they have to make sure that all of their equipment is in working order, that they can get out into the field, that if they do have a breakdown, that they can manage that to continue doing their job. We have irrigation, so that's a whole nother component. You have to be a marketer, so you have to know what the markets are and how to get move your crop. And so you have so many different jobs that sometimes it's easier to take a portion of that job and let somebody else who's going to be doing more research, staying on the forefront of some of those issues, make recommendations for you throughout that growing season, so you can keep up on all of the other jobs that you have going on as well.
So when you get into the world of doing, agronomy and helping farmers choose your seeds, that it feels like a trust business, right? Because you're selling them something that they can't actually see. They have to put it in the ground, make an investment in it, and then hope that what you're saying is true. How do you get those first couple of customers to trust you?
Yeah, so when we built North 40 Ag, I guess we went into it from kind of that side. So my husband farms with his family, and he had started getting interested in cover crops and some of these ideas. And the first year he had planted it, we had something out there that we didn't select. There was a radish that was in that seed mix that we didn't know what it was, and we had a drought year. We had our average annual precipitation is about 13 inches here, and that year we only had about 6 inches of annual precipitation. And there was this radish that was out there that was the size of a regulation football. So we grew this giant radish on essentially no moisture. So we were ecstatic and trying to repeat this. And when we took that seed, took that radish in, and I plop it on the counter where Mark got the seed, and I said, what is this? They had no idea. And they called where they got the seed from, and they had no idea. So it was a little disheartening that we couldn't reproduce it, but it was even scarier that what was next, what could be the bad thing that comes in that mix that we
yeah.
And so Mark had come from a line of most farmers, right, where he's trying something new, and sometimes, if it doesn't work, then they're never going to do it again. I'm an agronomist, and so we thought, we believe that there's a lot to offer here, and that if it's not done right the first time, that guys aren't going to come back and do it again. So we knew that we could offer some education with this. So to bridge the gap of people starting to believe us and trust us, one, we do a lot of it on our own place, but two, we do a lot of education events. We do workshops and field days and roundtables in order to get guys to understand it and go out in the field and look at the neighbor's stuff that you don't usually have an opportunity to see, to make yourself feel a little bit more comfortable with the idea.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you'd like to listen to the rest of the interview, it's linked below. And if you like this kind of conversation, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. That's a place where people meet other podcast listeners, get to be a part of a digital neighborhood, and really get a chance to practice things like how they write, their speaking skills, and have a place where they can have an open dialogue with people that want to discuss ideas and leave all of the insults and the craziness of regular social media out of it. So if you're interested, go to network.articulate.ventures.